This video is sponsored by water. Have you drunk some today? Alright, so we need to talk about video game box art. I know, not the most important subject in the world because we live in an age dominated by digital downloads and entire libraries existing virtually and the endless debates surrounding the conservation of old games and data in general, which is far more important, but I just want to take a moment to talk about box art because otherwise I'll lose the opportunity and never get another chance again. I'd say it's as important as a promotional poster for a movie. If you're invested from the start, it isn't likely to make any significant difference, but it could prove to be the deciding factor if you see it while you're out and about, looking through shop windows or checking out games online. We have Twitter and live streams to help sell a game now, but even those can't escape from using a lot of official artwork and giving out impressions based on box art. I know I shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but sometimes it's so easy. Video games have been around for long enough to be guilty of some truly shocking box art, and not all of it is from the industry's early days when no one knew what they were doing. I actually like a lot of older box art because at least people were being creative back then, but generally you can earmark the worst box art because of how much it makes you recoil in shock. There's some novelty value in buying a game with some terrifying monster gurning on the cover that isn't such a feature as some of the more disappointing box arts out there, so I think that's where the difficulties lie with this video. But hey, doesn't make any of these games bad or anything. In fact, maybe they've done well for themselves in spite of crappy box art. I should probably be celebrating that instead of highlighting some weird official art. Maybe something to consider for next time. It's hard to sell this as a video that people should care about in 2020 because there's plenty of other more important things going on at the moment and we haven't cared about box art for years. But I suppose, official art and renders are still important and we would notice if they were terrible. Plus, you would probably notice if the thumbnail to this video is terrible, so, maybe I'm doing important work after all. There's a first time for everything. My threshold for good box art pretty much begins and ends at its suiting of the game it's attached to. Not difficult to understand and apply to a game, just so long as you don't go down the many well-worn roads of man with gun and extreme close-up of a face, and instead look to do something a bit more creative that helps onlookers comprehend exactly what your game is all about. By that measure, Deadly Premonition is both an easy and surprisingly difficult game to make box art for. You're a detective investigating a murder in a small rural town, which sounds fairly basic, but it doesn't take long for things to get weird and supernatural and for the game to really embrace this by making everyone act like they're in an episode of SpongeBob. There are so many scenes and moments in Deadly Premonition that are absolute comedy gold, intentional or not, and it kinda makes it a tricky game to pin down tonally. Like most games these days, Deadly Premonition has different box art designs for each region, and most of them focus on the creepier side of things instead of the stranger parts of the game, because that's more likely to appeal to horror fans, and there sure are a lot of those. Just imagine how much fun you could have with the box art for the director's cut. Or, just don't. If you had the opportunity to release a popular game again under the banner of a director's cut or a definitive edition, wouldn't you try really hard to do something special with the box art, or at least make it stand out more compared to the original version? Deadly Premonition wasn't that popular a video game, but the devs still wanted a director's cut for some reason. That reason wasn't to have fun with the box art. Really, what's the point of even having a game like Deadly Premonition if you're going to do the game so dirty? I don't want to be too harsh because Access Games did some great work with other versions of this game, but if you're putting the effort in to have a director's cut in the first place, why would you make the box art so bland and uninspired? Maybe I'm being too harsh and they're going for a bit of minimalist design like the Japanese art for Final Fantasy games, but there's a dignified quality to those, whereas Deadly Premonition is a giant box of frogs that barely makes sense and deserves some box art that reflects that. Luckily, this isn't the version that lots of people saw on day one, and I can at least say that the standard release of Deadly Premonition captures some of the appeal of the game, but the definitive edition just doesn't do it for me. Put Francis Morgan's cheeky little face on there and we might have a deal. There's so many to choose from. In a small way, I am genuinely excited for the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. We've still got a lot of pissing competitions to wade through before these new consoles come out, but I'm reading lots of the news surrounding them and hopefully they'll move video games in an exciting direction. That being said, I don't like the box art templates that both consoles will be using. The PS5 is fine for the most part, but only if it doesn't come with blue casing so that it matches the header. But the Xbox Series X had a big problem with its giant fucking optimized for Series X logo. They've since scaled it down and hidden it more tastefully, so it shouldn't be a problem, but this obnoxious logo gave me war flashbacks of the many times that games have done this in the past. It's the featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series button slapped onto the corner of Shin Megami Tensei all over again, and as a bit of a box art purist, I like my covers to speak for themselves and advertise the game without shouting words at you. That being said, check this shit out. Does it hurt to look at? Should I take it away? Hey, life is tough, and Batman Arkham City didn't deserve this. Count yourself lucky. Of all the games to do this to as well. Batman Arkham City is a game that adequately speaks for itself and doesn't need too much help to sell itself, considering the ridiculous number of impressive review scores it received when it first came out. The original box art for Arkham City isn't great, but it serves its purpose and I kinda like the monochrome we've got going on here. But sadly, the game's success came at the tragic cost of creating a need for a Game of the Year edition. Other games have re-released with little banners to tell onlookers that this game did quite well for itself this year, which is achieved without distracting too much from the original box art. Nintendo had their Selects lineup with a little banner in the top left and it's, oh, so good. So it's even more galling that Arkham City works so hard to use every square inch of its cover to tell you that this game is the best goddamn experience of your life, and fills the front cover with quotes about how you must own this game that you've just bought. And honestly, I look at Batman on this cover and he looks reluctant to be there. The actual Arkham City logo has been squished down just above a massive slab of text promoting the DLC, and it says a lot that the first thing that pops out isn't the title of the game, but in fact the giant 10 out of 10 at the top, as if this game can't wait to tell you how good it is. The previous game was just as good, but even that had better composition in spite of having so many promo stickers. Slow your roll, Rocksteady, let your games breathe for a change. It's obvious why Arkham City's box art looks like this, because to your average consumer, seeing a game display its review score so proudly is pretty appealing. But if anything, it demonstrates how overused the Game of the Year label is. It's an obvious indicator of quality, but the tags are handed out so frequently that you'll often have a whole load of Game of the Year games alongside each other. So this is just the future we've made for ourselves. I don't know who decides what a game's box art will look like, but I really hope that it's someone or a group of people who worked closely on the game. I imagine the marketing team has some kind of say, because box art designs tend to undergo some pretty drastic changes from one region to the next, but there has to be some kind of input from artists who worked hard to give the game its unique style and tone. Generally this is true. It's not like games like Borderlands and Wind Waker suddenly dropped their incredibly artsy balls as soon as they needed art for the covers, but you can always count on at least one game doing an absolute madness with its utterly tone-deaf box art. Us Europeans had no problems with Eco, and in fact I was persuaded to buy it in the first place when I saw its genuinely incredible box art based off the works of Giorgio de Chirico and his surrealist depictions of large structures looming over small isolated silhouettes. Not the sort of work you'd expect to be put into box art. I was expecting some characters staring off into the distance in a vaguely action-like pose. Oh, there we go. The gap between the good box art for Eco and the North American version is so large that it's barely even quantifiable. The Japanese and European covers have had so much work put into them to strike a symbolism that carries throughout the whole game that this alternative is something close to offensive for me. I get that Westerners need something familiar to latch onto if they're to buy a product, but the downgrade is so vast that it becomes its own story, and weirdly Eco becomes more famous in the West for having crappy box art than for being a game of quiet ethereal ambience as you attempt to escort Yorda through a hostile castle full of reminders that if you're enjoying this video and want to see more, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications of every new video. It upsets me a lot that the box art was changed so much because it implies that Westerners, or at least Americans, haven't got any appreciation for classical art anymore and won't, at the very least, be intrigued by box art as uniquely beautiful as this. You're telling me that you wouldn't look at this and wonder what the game is like and who these characters are, and it might persuade you to maybe buy the game? This speaks more to the modern day cover art cliches that we need video games to look a certain way in order for people to buy them, because we take comfort in the familiar and don't like to be challenged or forced to think about something for more than 2 seconds. It's not like it worked in the game's favour, since it didn't sell very well and a lot of people are pointing at waxy-faced Eco blankly brandishing his wooden sword of Ghost Yorda and a random wimble in the background as the cause. Stop nerfing your artists so much, we can handle it. Let's go back to talking about horror games, because it is tricky business designing box art for horror titles that doesn't ruin the experience. Obviously, you can't really make it super scary, because a random kid could see it, and that's no good. But also, you can't really give away too many details about the nature of the scares before anyone has had a chance to play it. It's best not to play your hand before anyone's played your game. There's an old horror movie adage that you might be familiar with about not showing the monster, either at all or at least not until the end. The idea being that the images our imagination can conjure up will always be scarier than any kind of reality, and this isn't a rule set in stone or anything, but it certainly can help make a film scarier if done correctly. Video games are somewhat similar, but often you do need to confront the bad guy at some point, so you can't keep it hidden for the whole time. You can, however, make your game as atmospheric as you like, and keep the player in the dark for as long as possible, something that Amnesia the Dark Descent achieves by literally making every room very dark and obscuring the monster until it's too late and he's too close for comfort. Great work! All we need is some box art that works with all this and you're all set. Oh my god, what are you doing? Who did this? And did they have ulterior motives? That wouldn't surprise me, because I can't think of many worse ways of making box art for a horror game. It's very similar to Eco with how the European box art is beautiful and subtle, and yet the North American cover is some horrifying mistake that gives off the completely wrong message for onlookers. It's almost impressive how many different ways the Amnesia box art fails, since it puts the monster front and center for everyone to see before buying the game, but even then they've done such a crap job of portraying the monster so that this game looks infinitesimally more hilarious than it is. Like, I remember Amnesia and the fear it instilled in me for being this vulnerable, insane man floundering around in the darkness, desperately avoiding a monster that always found a way to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, but clearly, I needn't have worried if it looks like this. The guy on the cover doesn't even look all that scared, he just looks slightly inconvenienced by the radial blur that's doing weird things to his torch. Hopefully he doesn't turn around, because he'd never be scared of anything ever again. I'm surprised the monster doesn't have a silly hat for good measure. That would cover all remaining bases. Is it cheating to include a game that hasn't even come out yet? No, it's not at all, because when a game is making trailers and press releases and trying to get some positive attention thrown its way, a publisher will usually show some box art to immediately get the public on side and give them an early look at what this game is going to be like. I'm immediately reminded of Doom 2016, which did the exact opposite by looking like every other FPS cover in the industry, despite being very different, and if I made this video a month ago, I probably would have mentioned it in some capacity. However, you can always count on EA to make headlines for all the wrong reasons, but with the PS4 and the Xbox One coming to a close and this year's FIFA taking on an even more lackadaisical approach to game design, I didn't expect any significant news surrounding FIFA 21 apart from, yeah, it's another one, whatever. Then EA dropped this bomb towards the end of last month and, yeah, that'll do it. What in the fresh hell am I looking at? Is this just where we are with EA's yearly sports franchises? Is this an acceptance that they don't need to try to entice new players, since the people who buy it every year, me, don't need any extra convincing? Every year, FIFA dedicates their cover art to a famous in-form footballer with maybe some flashy shapes or some crowd thrown in there for good measure. I have no earthly idea why EA have decided to give this year's FIFA to a 5-year-old in MS Paint whose passion is graphic design, but it is by far and away the worst bit of box art I have ever seen. Why change what's worked for so long if the alternative is some random pictures of Kylian Mbappe assembled without a thought for how these images would sit together? It's not a significant release within the franchise's history, which is very concerning for what's to come, but perhaps this will be the straw that breaks the camel's back with FIFA. It's not immediately recognizable as FIFA, so maybe enough people overlook it and buy an actually decent video game? Or perhaps the general public are so brainwashed at this point that they won't take more than a glance at the game's box art and blindly consume their regurgitated sports game. Can't be broke if it never worked in the first place. This RabbidLuigi, and I do think we've hit some kind of milestone with FIFA 21's box art because it's so basic and so bare bones that I physically can't imagine how we get worse from here. You know, do we need a cover that's smeared with sick and shit before we realise that box art does have relevancy in the 21st century and can generate all the wrong publicity for a game? FIFA 22 will be the first FIFA of a new generation, and personally, I can't wait. I'm hoping for a drawing made of crayon, I really am. So, what topic would you like to see me cover next? Leave your suggestion in a comment on this video because I'll be taking the best ideas and making a poll on my community tab, which you can then vote on to decide what the next video is about. I'll be announcing the winner of the poll over on my Twitter, so make sure you follow me so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.